Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us at Montgomery Summit. I'm Jillian Ward. I'm managing editor for U.S. technology at Bloomberg News in San Francisco. I'm very pleased to welcome Jim Whitehurst, the president of IBM. He's responsible for the IBM Cloud and Cognitive Software Organization, as well as corporate strategy. Before IBM, he was the CEO of Red Hat, which was acquired by IBM in 2019, and he was also COO of Delta Airlines before that. Jim, welcome.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Why don't we start off by setting the scene a little bit? IBM has transformed itself several times over its 110-year history. The latest transformation has been happening over the past 10 years or so and was accelerated by the acquisition of Red Hat, which was the biggest transaction in the company's history and the deal that brought you to the company. Now, IBM's planning to spin off its managed infrastructure business by the end of this year. Would you describe how the new IBM is different than the company was 10 years ago, not just products, but in how it does business and how it approaches strategy?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things, I'm obviously relatively new to IBM as I came in via an acquisition, is the way IBM thinks about strategy is very expansive. So we really look at what is the need that enterprises have from technology and what's the state of technology. And we're willing to fundamentally change kind of who we are and what we do to make that real. So just to kind of rewind quickly to set the context, if you go back, as you said, 10 years ago, I'll say 20 years ago, we were in the context of client server and hardware. So you had all this variety of hardware, best of breed applications. So you had this many to many relationship as people were implementing ERPs and CRM. So you had all this complexity in the data center. And if you recall, that was also back when Nicholas Carr wrote his famous article, IT doesn't matter, it's not about competitive advantage. So if you think about in that world, IBM, in order to meet enterprise clients' needs, built the biggest middleware software portfolio ever with WebSphere, built a systems integration capability to be able to weave all that stuff together to implement SAP. And then because CEOs didn't see it as a real source of competitive advantage, we also built a big managed outsourcing business to actually run it for clients. So CEOs would say, I want a best-in-class ERP system, IBM, build it and run it, here are the keys. If we fast forward to where we are today, at the core of our strategy is a recognition that the context of technology has changed. It's now about how you ingest innovation quickly. And there's innovation coming from so many more places. It used to be 2 or 3 vendors in the category. Now it's open source, it's SaaS vendors, it's traditional vendors, it's startups, it's public clouds. And the whole kind of use of technology now is around more innovation than automation of kind of traditional processes. And by the way, every CEO thinks technology is core to their competitive advantage. So nobody wants to hand the keys to anybody to do that. Ask a CEO, do you want to hand off or outsource your website or mobile app to anybody? And they'll look at you like you're crazy because it's core to how they create value. So in that context, our strategy now, as we talked about, manifests itself, and we call it hybrid cloud and AI. But what it really is saying, how do you think about an architecture that enables an enterprise to ingest innovation from wherever, whether that's from a hyperscaler, from a SaaS vendor, from open source, from a traditional vendor, in a safe, secure, reliable way, and recognizing that you can't build an application now that's not heavily reliant on AI because it's affecting not only applications, but business processes. So we call our strategy hybrid cloud and AI, but it's at its core, it's recognizing the use of technology is different and the nature of the technology that enterprises are using are different. And that goes all the way into a retooling of how we go to market. So it's less about we'll do it for you and we'll do it with you. And so it pervades the entire company in terms of the strategy and how we look to deliver.
Great. Going to the hybrid cloud, I think IBM's definitely been focusing its pitch on hybrid cloud since the purchase of Red Hat. And earlier this week, you all more widely released your hybrid cloud service, which is called IBM Cloud Satellite. It seems like the term hybrid cloud is somewhat open to interpretation sometimes. Can you explain what it means at IBM and how is it different from other cloud providers, from the Googles and Microsofts and Amazon Web Services of the world?
Yeah, so look, I think hybrid cloud, the issue with hybrid cloud is it is a very generic term, and it typically refers to I have workloads on premise and I have workloads in the cloud. So almost anybody can talk about their products being hybrid cloud because you can say, well, it runs in both places, or I can provide you visibility into applications both places. Our very strong belief is that to truly be able to ingest innovation from anywhere in a safe, secure, reliable way, you need to have a common platform that runs everywhere. So at the core of our hybrid cloud strategy is a platform that runs on every major cloud. It runs on premise. It runs virtualized on major hypervisors. It runs on the mainframe. It runs on ARM chips, right? Literally, so it can run from the factory floor up to Amazon. And if you don't have a common platform, you really can't move applications around. You can't necessarily source innovation. And we learned that at Red Hat with Linux. Like Linux isn't Linux. Red Hat Linux, it became the standard because it could run everywhere. And so we have this platform that runs everywhere. And that was the Red Hat acquisition, was to get a platform that's fully open source, runs across chip architectures, runs across every major public cloud and kind of deployment models on premise. What Cloud Satellite is, and these are all part of an architecture, is, okay, well, that's great. You can now run an application anywhere. But when you're thinking about building and managing an application, how do you go about doing that if you're using different database services everywhere you are? And to really avail yourself of the power of cloud requires automation. It's not just where you're running an application, it's how you're running it. Hyper automation, very, very standardized. And so the nice part about the focus we had on this platform that runs anywhere is IBM's cloud is built on that. Well, so guess what? We can now take all of our cloud services and say, run them wherever you want to run them. You want to run them on Amazon, run them on Amazon. You want to run them on Google or on premise or on the edge, you can run it anywhere because it all runs on a common platform. How that's different is other cloud providers have a whole set of services, but they're typically wedded to their underlying platform. And so, Amazon, and by the way, Amazon is much more of a partner than I would say a competitor, because our platform runs on, they run our platform as a managed service, right? So they're a great partner of ours, but they can land something like Outpost on premise, but it has to be a full Amazon stack where we can land, because we have the platform, land anywhere. And so you can consume at different levels. You can say, I'm going to run the same platform everywhere and I'll manage it. Or you can say, hey, IBM, I want to be able to run something across on-premise and Amazon. I want one control plane to be able to do that, one security framework to be able to do that. And we can do that wherever it is, on-premise, on Amazon, on IBM cloud. So that kind of hybrid model, but it's not just we can see the application, it's truly running the same infrastructure, is unique, but I think required to truly be able to consume innovation wherever you want to consume innovation.
I think what you're saying is IBM's hybrid cloud is more adaptable than others because it's kind of, you can interchange other cloud services on the underlying platform of IBM. Is that sort of the takeaway?
Yeah, basically, you can run our platform anywhere. It's like the operating system of the future, if you want to call a container platform that. It needs to be able to run everywhere, because if you want to consume services on Google, yes, you can call them from on-premise, but if it's at all data heavy, you need to run the application on Google. And so, well, what if you are mainly been wedded to Amazon or IBM cloud? Well, that gets to be difficult. Where if you have one common fabric, where you choose to deploy an application becomes pretty frictionless. I'll give you another example. It's an IBM-centric example, but people do machine learning a lot on cloud because of the characteristics of cloud and scale up. But in order to do that, you got to move a lot of data to the cloud. We now have a bunch of clients who say, well, all my data is generated on my transactional systems on the mainframe. Well, now you can frankly run those same ML algorithms at night when the mainframe's being used less. Developers never even need to know they're running on the mainframe, right? So by creating that kind of hybrid kind of abstraction layer, it allows developers to move faster because they're not really worried at all about deployment model. And then ultimately you can choose where and how you deploy applications on what makes most sense, whether that's for security, compliance, performance, economics. But you can't do that if you can't move the application, and you can't move the application if you don't have a common platform.
Got it. Thanks. Why don't we go back to the spinoff of the managed infrastructure services business? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the idea and give us some of the context for that decision?
Yeah, so the managed service business, as I talked about, was built in an era where generally enterprises were happy to let someone else kind of run their infrastructure for them, and that's still a really important business. We have a ton of infrastructure out there that has the nature of that complexity. The issue with that business is it's just very, very different than where we're going now. So it's around, how do I manage heterogeneity in the most effective, efficient way, where most of what enterprises are looking to do now is say, how do I have a homogeneous infrastructure that lets me move faster? And frankly, the way you manage those businesses are different. My simple analogy is running a managed service business, which is about trying to reduce variance, manage complexity, feels a lot like running Delta Airlines. And you can see it when we have management meetings, where building a product business, which is kind of the rest of IBM, feels a lot like running Red Hat. But those are different cadences, they're different investment profiles, different kind of even profiles of individuals who are going to be successful in those different types of roles. And trying to do that all in one company has become, there's not a lot of synergy now as we're trying to drive feature velocity and innovation in one and efficiency in the other. And as there's the relative synergies get to be less, the dyssynergies are obvious in terms of the whole different cadence investment profile. So we thought it made sense to separate those so the managed service business can focus on automation in kind of driving operational efficiency, and RemainCo or IBM can focus more on innovation and kind of a forward-looking, kind of where's the world going and how do we invest into that.
Great. How have the pandemic and its changes to the environment, the economic environment, the business environment, impacted your timeline for completing that spinoff by the end of 2021?
No, we're still on track to get it done. The beauty of being a very large technology company with a lot of facility and technology, I think within a week or two, we had 95% of our people up and working remotely, and so had the capability to do that in terms of the network and security very, very quickly. So we're right on track for that. There really hasn't been a significant impact associated with COVID in that timeline at all, which is good.
Good. Staying on that topic for a moment, as we approach the 1-year anniversary of the initial US shutdowns related to the pandemic, what do you think is the outlook for the overall business climate, and how is that affecting your thinking and planning at IBM? Do you have visibility on that?
Well, look, so there is a substantial amount of optimism. We see that when we talk to our clients. We see that in various CEO surveys, and what used to be 25 years ago when people were optimistic, you saw a lot of CapEx. Today, when leaders are optimistic, you see a lot of spend on technology because it is today's CapEx, even if it's manifested in OpEx, but investments in technology. So we feel really good about the spending profile that we are seeing as we get into the year. We're engaged in a lot of really transformative discussions with our clients. There's a kind of a confluence of several things. I think there's a lot of optimism, which was great to see. There's a sense of how we're going to work is going to change, right? We're not going to go back into the office 5 days a week. And so how we need to work is changing. And as AI is really kind of coming of age, or it's maturing to the point that it kind of moves out of the labs or bespoke applications, thinking about, intelligent workflows, as we call them, how you really think about robotic process automation, how do you really infuse that with deep AI is coming into its own. And you put those three things together, our discussions about transformation with clients are really blossoming right now.
Great. There does seem to be a fair amount of optimism within the company, and the news of the spinoff was well received. At the same time, the company has lagged behind most of its software and tech services peers in terms of total return and valuation for the past year. IBM's market cap is a little bit below where it was a year ago, despite surging tech valuations in many other areas. Why do you think the shift to hybrid cloud, the purchase of Red Hat, the planned spinoff, all these big shifts haven't gone farther yet to boost confidence in the company and lift the stock price?
Well, I think there's several things we can unpack underneath that. So first off, this hybrid cloud architecture has an S-curve adoption impact. And what I mean by that is, you land the architecture, you're typically not onboarding traditional applications. So it's as new applications get built or as applications get refactored, they ramp on. And so if you think about the shape of the revenue curve, you do all the hard work to land OpenShift or our hybrid cloud platform as the standard. Great, you did that. Now you see almost zero revenue, right? And then it builds as people put applications. And so we feel really good about how we've landed the platform, by far the largest install base of a container platform in the market. We feel good about the initial adoption we're seeing with clients. So we feel good about where that overall stands. I will say, and this is kind of new to me as being part of IBM, is the perpetuity license model is relatively new to me because Red Hat was one of the original subscription-oriented models. I do think our progress gets frankly masked in the fact that people don't want to do big multi-year ELAs in a really, really down year, right? And so, we talked about that a little bit on the earnings call, is that some of those kind of large renewals don't renew it in the same way when people are holding money a little dear. So frankly, I do think some of our actual progress, if we look at kind of workloads and selections with our clients, are obscured by a business model that's more lumpy. And so that's one of the reasons, like if you look at us versus peers, even though we're seeing really good metrics with Red Hat, which show through, and obviously that flows through to all of the services and other components, it hasn't shown up as much as we'd like in the IBM numbers yet. But as we said, we'll see that progress through this year and certainly in next year.
Okay, the company did just report a 10th straight quarter with no real sales gains, and it sounds like you expect those lumps to even out a little bit over time. When do you, is it a year out or several years out for the transformation to show up in the revenue numbers, do you think?
Well, what we said is you should expect, say, next year to see mid-single-digit growth numbers. And obviously, it's a track to get there. So in the back half of this year, you should see traction. And then next year, you should see that. So we're not talking, let us promise multiple years out, right? At this point, we can see where and how we're landing the platform traction with clients. So we can kind of look out over that period of time and feel pretty confident that we'll grow in 2022, certainly.
Okay. Something that's a big concern for enterprises and consumers alike is cybersecurity. The attack on SolarWinds that was disclosed late last year was a reminder that there can be vulnerabilities everywhere, even in a company that many people had never heard of. What do you see as the tech industry's biggest blind spots when it comes to cybersecurity, the biggest threats existing on the horizon, something we haven't thought of that's the nature of a blind spot? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the two biggest blind spots that we see is, first off, the developer is now king, right? Because we're all about how do we move at a faster pace, et cetera. And, developers in moving fast want choice and they want variety. Well, variety and security are a tough combination. The analogy I would make is the average security kind of incident isn't, spies shooting in through the skylights. It's somebody checking every window. And if you have 1 million windows, the likelihood that one got left unlocked is high, right? And so this real focus on variety and self-service has led to a whole set of challenges for security. And frankly, one of the reasons we keep talking about having a common one platform, having a common operating model across it, I think matters. So that's number one. It's how do you ensure the feature velocity and variety and choice that developers want, but still be able to do that in a safe, secure, reliable way. Frankly, I think the other thing is ensuring that we have tech players that have a shared sense of responsibility. In other words, it is often the case where not SolarWinds, but many of the things you look at, each component, each vendor can argue, oh, what I did is totally safe and secure. Well, what I did is totally safe and secure. It's when you plug the things together is where the seams kind of start to show. And so I do think vendors need to step up and say, for my clients, I have a shared responsibility around security that goes beyond, is my product safe or did I do this securely, into it's jointly responsible. I think one of the reasons IBM has such a strong position in security and kind of is often affiliated with trust is we do go into every engagement around security first. And even if it's not components of our stack, we are jointly responsible when there's a problem, and we think of it that way. And I do think we have a lot of vendors who are running saying, here's my piece, here's my piece, here's my piece. If you don't think about how those plug together to offer the holistic solution, that's where the security issues have. And we need every vendor to step up and say, it's not just about me and my piece, it's about all of us and how my things are getting used in a joint set of responsibility. I mean, the analogy would be, which we see now, if you want to hop into politics, is like, what responsibility do social media platforms have for the content on their platforms? It's not too different. What responsibility do technology platforms have for the potential security vulnerabilities that can manifest on their platforms and the way people use them? And I think I'd argue that from an IBM perspective for security, we're not in social media, but I'll say security, it's like we should feel a shared sense of responsibility, people using our platform, to make sure that it is inherently secure, or we work with our clients to do that. And if we don't have that shared sense, you're never going to, from a technical perspective, solve every security problem.
Thanks. I like that analogy a lot. Turning for a minute to something sort of along those lines, to the current environment for tech regulation. Even though this doesn't touch IBM directly at the moment, what's your take on the groundswell and support over the past few years for greater regulation of big technology companies?
I think it's necessary. I mean, the implications for many of the technologies we have, I think we all need to recognize we don't even fully know those yet. So when you think about something like AI, we've been investing at Red Hat at IBM I've only been gone from Red Hat for a long time. So at IBM for years, with AI ethicists on, okay, what are the implications? How do you think about bias? And, I think it's great that IBM is stepping up and doing it. Nobody's told us that we need to do that. At some point, shouldn't every company involved in AI need to participate in that, as an example? Certainly, as we think about information and who has access to information, more blurry metadata. So the data about the information and who has access to that, who owns it, who should have the rights to that. Those are things that it's hard to ask an industry to self-regulate. But trust in the technology industry is going to be heavily based on ensuring that we have models that people kind of believe in that ultimately lead to good. If for tech to do good, we have to be trusted, and we're not going to be able to be trusted if we're each on our own doing things. And so I think we welcome a higher degree of kind of scrutiny and regulation in these really important issues that have implications that will manifest over generations that we need to be thinking of now. And there's certainly work done in academia. There's certainly research that IBM's doing, but thinking of having regulatory frameworks and so common standards, I think, is critical.
Many technology companies sort of push back, saying that there isn't a deep enough understanding of the technological aspects of this to regulate in a precise way. Do you think that there's a way for governments to regulate without stifling innovation at the same time?
Well, I think that's why we need to work together. Industry needs to work with government to come up with responsible regulation that balances the need to experiment and advance and continue to innovate with the need to protect society. I don't think the analogy is any different. One could argue, well, is intellectual property law good or bad? I think we have a sense of intellectual property law that protects people, at the same time, allows innovation to occur. And so I think we've kind of come across other issues like this in the past, and we've had workable solutions. I think saying, oh, government doesn't understand, so don't look here, isn't a very satisfying answer.
Okay. I wanted to touch briefly on the concept of patents. IBM has long been known for winning the most patents year after year for decades, but the number of patents won has plateaued and has held pretty steady for about the past 4 years. And income from patent licenses was at the lowest in 2020 since at least 1996 at IBM. It was about the same as 2019. I'm interested in whether there's been a change in strategy or investment in your approach to patents and why the numbers show this change.
Yeah, so I think our general belief is the patent licensing model worked well for a long time, but when we start looking at how innovation happens now and ideas build upon ideas, that the patent licensing model, not that it will totally go away, it's not the future of how one monetizes innovation. The future is going to include, joint ventures. It's going to employ different forms of collaboration, different ways to manifest that value. So it's not that we're going to stop doing that, but I think we have a intentional strategy to say, hey, we have amazing amounts of intellectual property, but merely licensing that is probably not the way to optimize that value for IBM, but also for those technologies to have as big an impact as they can have. So we're working on a whole set of models, from starting ventures to JVing to other types of partnerships, to, I think, better reflect the value of the extraordinary innovations that we see. I will say, as a kind of coming in from Red Hat, one of the things that has just been extraordinary to see is that many incredible people and that much money that IBM puts into research, and the progress that we've made in all kind of areas. IBM, it's not just around computing, right? Because of our historical semiconductor strength, in materials. And so, how you can, recycle plastics in fundamental new ways, or battery technologies. We have some extraordinary technologies that, again, I think we are looking for the best vehicles to make sure they have the biggest impact.
Great. That brings us to the end of our time together, but I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining us. This has been Jim Whitehurst, the president of IBM at the Montgomery Summit.
Thanks for having me.